My name is Madhu Sarin, and I don't really have an organization as such, but I'm part of this network, our kind of informal network of many grassroots organizations, and we call ourselves the Campaign for Survival and Dignity. So we kind of fought for, this Forest Rights Act, and we are continuing to fight for its proper implementation. And I myself live in Chandigarh, in North India. That's where I'm based.
And so the implementation of the forest rights is not going as quickly as it could have?
No, they were very serious problems to begin with, because the government just announced implementation, and they said, start from day after tomorrow, without any preparation, without any information dissemination, without making even the government officials who were to be involved with implementing the act really understand what the provisions were, and no awareness generation amongst the communities in terms of all the rights that they can claim. So the first 3-4 years were actually pretty disastrous, because all the bureaucrats took over when it's meant to be a very empowering process even of recognition of rights. It's in the village assembly, people make their claims and people have to verify, and there everybody knows everyone else, so it's much more difficult for people to make false claims. But they didn't make people aware of these provisions. So there was, and they were focusing on only one of the rights, which is to do with individual small pieces of land under cultivation. Nothing about community forest rights. But after a lot of protests and whatever, and then last year we got a very good minister, in charge of tribal affairs, and he has now, taken a lot of initiatives. So new rules have been notified, new guidelines have been given, and the powers of communities have been clarified. Their rights over the produce have been clarified. So now we are hoping things will move a lot better.
And implementation is different from state to state, right?
Yeah, because India being having a federal structure, ultimately the implementation is up to the state government, and some of the states, they're not interested, they're not taking any initiative. Others took initiative and they went like a bulldozer, sort of bypassing all the procedures laid down in the act, but just went and said, oh, we've done so much, but not in the right way. And so there's been a lot of variation between the different states, and to some extent, well, the center can only prod them on. If a particular state government is just slow or not very interested, the center can't really force them, beyond a point.
Is there a state that's done a very good job, that's tried very hard to do right by the Forest Act?
Well, I think from what we know, probably the best in terms of, bringing in civil society organizations, opening up the process, being much more open to even saying, okay, our officials don't understand. So actually asking NGOs to come and do training for government officials, issuing a lot of orders to clarify implementation. I think Orissa was probably, the most open and good in many respects. Yeah. But even in Orissa, as far as community forest rights are concerned, they have not been very forthcoming. Now we have to see, because with the new rules say that, every village must have its community forest resource rights recognized. And if for some reason they are not for any particular village, those reasons must be recorded in writing. So there will be much more pressure on the government. But these rules have just been issued last month. So, it'll take a while. Now this time the ministry is organizing regional workshops with the state government officials, and they're explaining the new rules, so hopefully it will work better. But we have to wait and see.
How much is known about this issue, both in India and outside of India? What is your impression of what people know?
Which people?
In India, and then here, either here or in Europe, do people understand what's taking place, do you think?
Well, within the, circuits,
Yeah. Well, here.
Those involved concerned with tenurial reform and recognition of rights, and those working on forestry issues, I think the Indian Forest Rights Act is pretty well known now. And within the country it's the same, those people who are, in some form or the other involved with forest related issues of indigenous people living in forest areas and their issues and problems. I think a lot of people in those areas know. The general public, maybe depending on, how much they know.
Because there was a big, there was a big march in early October, right?
Yeah, that was not just on the Forest Rights Act. That was for the whole sort of land reform thing. Mm-hmm. But I think they added the Forest Rights Act also amongst one of their demands. But yeah,
okay.
It's a bit kind of strange. I mean, there was this big march, and then they went and signed some agreement with the minister, and stopped it.
But it was a federal minister, so now that agreement has to go.
Yeah, but they had a march 2-3 years ago, and the prime minister, they got him to agree, and the a land reforms committee or commission was set up with the prime minister heading it. It never met. And now they've signed with a lower level minister. So I don't know what that's going to lead to, quite frankly. It was a huge mobilization, but a very strange way of...
Yeah. Baripada, right?
Yeah, in Bari. Well, over there, the issue was that, these 4 villages had been protecting their forest for almost 20 years. And out of the 4, 3 of the villages had already claimed their rights over this forest. And then the forest department, totally ignoring the law, went and designed some ecotourism project for this same forest, and without either seeking the consent of the villagers or informing them or whatever, started, felling trees to build a jogging track and whatever, and then they started fencing off the forest. So the villagers got very agitated about it, and they protested. And so that led to this whole thing of, it led to a huge protest. It led to large-scale mobilization as people understood what this meant. It basically meant that their forest would be fenced off, and instead of being their forest from which they derived all kinds of produce and benefits, this would be converted into some sort of a resort for tourists, and so the villagers will lose out from that access. So they succeeded in putting a stop to that, that ecotourism project. Actually, I've been trying to keep track of what happened since. And one thing I was told several weeks ago, I must say I'm not really up to date on, but they had arrested their leader on some cooked up charge, So, the struggle continues. It's not so easy, but they will get it together. They will get it together.
And this was in Orissa, which is one of the better states.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What happens in one of the states that are not so good?
In most of the other states, especially community forest rights, they're not recognizing it all, or ignoring them altogether, or converting them into something totally different. What the law provides is that people can reclaim their customary community, their forests within their customary boundary. But because the people are not made fully aware of what the law provides for, so if at all, some official will say, okay, you can have rights over 10 hectares of forest, when they're using maybe 500 hectares or whatever. So that kind of thing. In some of the states, in fact, other than Odisha and Maharashtra, and maybe the odd few cases here and there in one or two other states, no community rights have been recognized till now. So, it's a long way to go. And now we will have to see with the new rules and all, how
does working with RRI and all the partners around the world, how does that help?
Well, it helps in terms of, being aware of what's happening in other countries, what strategies other people are using, and so it's a kind of give and take situation.
Okay. Are there any countries that have lessons that are very helpful for your work in India?
Well, where other countries have undertaken this kind of tenure reform, in fact, we are planning a conference in December, at which Arvind is inviting 3 people, one from China, one from Mexico, another one from somewhere else, and they will be sharing their experiences. So the idea is that, through this interchange and exchange, one can then exert greater pressure on local officials and government people that, if other countries can be doing this, then we also need to move ahead. So that's the...
But, it strikes me as interesting that, for example, the lessons learned in Guatemala could be applicable in Cameroon. It's almost, but India itself is a very unique country.
Yeah.
It's quite bigger.
Much, it's a subcontinent.
Exactly.
Yeah, with a lot of diversity.
Right.
And even in terms of, forest rights, there's so many different situations. So, within the law, its implementation needs to be adapted for each state accordingly. And particularly in northeast India, which is on the other side of Bangladesh, it's a totally different situation. So most of those states, in fact, in those states, many of the customary rights are already recognized and protected under the Constitution. So they have not implemented the law. And there are, a lot of ambiguities that does the law really offer any benefits, or might it weaken existing rights? So even the local communities are not very clear about it. So anyway, we leave people to sort that one out.
Well, I guess I'll let you get back. Did you think you missed anything? Or?
No, I think that's, yeah.
Okay.
Just
Is it okay to use this interview for any promotional purposes that help RRI in terms of getting its word out and discussing what it does?
I suppose it should be okay. No
Okay.
problem. Okay.
Thank you.